The only real difference between him and Basil is that he was small and had a very large henpecking wife.
So I didn't have any problems with saying what I didn't think was funny. No, I don't believe that. Why does he say that?
It was daring, unflinching, and side-splittingly hilarious. A television sitcom so gloriously ridiculous it attained cult status after a mere dozen episodes. Fawlty Towers did not just break rules. It ridiculed them, stomped over them, and then stumbled over them with contempt. But in the middle of all the madness, one very specific scene passed an unwritten border, one that could never be unpassed. So, what was so special about that not-so-famous scene that caused the show's subtle withdrawal? Stay tuned as we reveal the scene that derailed Fawlty Towers. The real hotel horror that inspired a comedy legend. It was supposed to be just another crash pad. Nothing elaborate, just a good hotel in a quaint seaside town. It was 1970, and the Monty Python crew had come to Torquay to film Flying Circus. What they encountered, however, was not only accommodation. It was a bizarre, almost hilarious crash course in how not to operate a hotel. And for John Cleese, the genesis of one of British television's greatest catastrophes, Basil Fawlty. Now envision this. You enter a hotel after a long journey, eager to relax. You're greeted by a man so hostile and suspicious that you begin to wonder if you're being secretly recorded. That was Donald Sinclair, the actual manager of the Gleneagles Hotel, who somehow combined customer service and paranoia. He was not just rude. He was theatrically unpredictable. He treated guests like conquerors and suspected their every action as if each one could be conspiring against him. One moment that left the Pythons in utter amazement. Eric Idle had accidentally left his briefcase in the lobby. Rather than doing what any rational hotelier would, courteously asking who it belonged to, Sinclair jumped to conclusions. In no time at all, he seized the case and hurled it over a garden hedge, believing it to be a bomb. Not exactly a hot welcome, and hardly the sort of security policy that you would associate with a hospitality expert. But that wasn't a one-off. When Terry Gilliam had his knife and fork the wrong way, Sinclair strode over to teach him table manners, as if bad utensil manners were a crime. Guest complaints were treated with contempt. Sinclair resolved nothing but made things worse, getting the atmosphere as comically intolerable as it was true. John Cleese was perplexed and entertained. There was a man so implausibly bad at the job, so inadvertently absurd, that Cleese couldn't help but watch him with a comedian's interest. In Sinclair's catastrophe class in hospitality, there was something strangely genius. Cleese scribbled notes, actual ones. Years on, with co-writer and then-wife Connie Booth, he would transpose all of that lunacy into a character who would make TV history. Basil Fawlty, the utterly dysfunctional hotel manager at the center of Fawlty Towers, was not born of fiction, but of this strange reality. Cleese amplified the quirks, naturally. Basil's tantrums, his perpetual passive-aggressive snipes, and his pitiful inability to cope with stress were ramped up for comedic purposes. But the essence of Basil, his paranoia, social ineptness, and skill at offending everyone, came directly from Sinclair. The series itself ran for just 12 episodes between 1975 and 1979, but it left a mark few sitcoms ever achieve. Every chaotic misunderstanding, every meltdown behind a reception desk, was a tribute to that bewildering experience in Torquay. Ironically, Sinclair never fully grasped that he had inspired the show. He passed away in 1981, apparently unaware that his misguided management style had been immortalized in British comedy. But while Fawlty Towers gained legendary status, the real story behind its origin remains stranger and funnier than fiction. It wasn't crafted in a writer's room out of thin air. It began with a chance encounter in a town no one expected to remember, inside a hotel no one expected to talk about. And the man who inspired it all? He believed he was running a tight ship when, in reality, he was captain of the Titanic of customer service. However, for John Cleese, it was just the start. Prior to Fawlty Towers, prior to Basil, and prior to the plaudits, how did his path begin? Exactly Tune in to uncover the whole story. From chaos to Cambridge, the making of John Cleese. Well before the Monty Python craze and Basil Fawlty's hotel catastrophes, John Cleese was meandering through the low-key seaside resort of Weston-super-Mare. He was the solitary child of Reginald Cleese, an insurance agent who hated the family's original last name, Cheese. Believing it much too absurd for an army officer, Reginald officially switched Cheese to Cleese in 1923, a choice that would eventually coincide with the bizarre appeal of his son's comedic legacy. Cleese towered over the other students at school, literally. At age 13, he was already over 6 feet tall, his lanky stature the center of attention before his own wit was. But beneath the gangly height and the school uniform, something more was gestating. His initial schooling at St. Peter's Preparatory School, financed on the basis of a family bequest, sowed 2 crucial seeds: a passion for language and a keen observation of human behavior. He was not merely a bright boy doing well at cricket and boxing. He was already learning the insanities of life, unbeknownst to him. The classroom itself, though, wasn't sufficient to stifle his curiosity. A statue joke during his school days at Clifton College foreshadowed the sort of humor Cleese would later master: dry, visual, and strangely cerebral. He decorated footprints from a Field Marshal Haig statue, as if it had strayed to the bathroom. Childish pranks, maybe, but even then, it was telling through farce. But not everything was funny. When Cleese learned, at 17, that he had been overlooked for a house prefect role in favor of others despite his scholarly achievements, it left its mark. As he himself put it, it altered his perception of fairness and respect, one that would resonate in the satirical prism by which he eventually critiqued authorities and institutions. With places at university threatened by the abolition of national service, Cleese was forced to put his ambition of going to Cambridge on hold. Instead, he went back to his former prep school, this time not as a pupil, but as a teacher of English, history, Latin, and science. Ironically, the Latin classes he taught so many years ago would resurface in Life of Brian, when Cleese's character correctly alters the grammar of anti-Roman slogans. Each odd sidetrack along the way somehow entered his creative arsenal. Eventually, he took up his place at Downing College, Cambridge, to read law. But fate had other intentions. At a student fair, the Footlights Theater Club approached him and asked if he sang or danced. "No," said Cleese, adding that if there was anything more dreadful than his dancing, it was his singing. "So what do you do?" they asked. "I make people laugh." And that, quite literally, was his foot in the door. At Footlights, Cleese ran into future collaborators Tim Brook-Taylor, Bill Oddie, and the one who would turn everything around, Graham Chapman. The 4 of them started working up the sort of bizarre, intellectual, and subversive comedy that would go on to dominate British television. Even after he graduated in 1963 with a law degree, Cleese's father still kept sending him newspaper advertisements for retail management positions, just in case this comedy business didn't pan out. But still, how did this academically talented, prank call schoolboy become a comedic giant before Fawlty Towers ever hit the air? Wait and see to untangle the whole tale. A genius mess of brilliance and marriage. Fawlty Towers, a masterful mess of madness and marriage. Ever curious as to how a hotel owned by a man on the edge of insanity ended up as one of the most popular sitcoms in all of British history? It wasn't because John Cleese independently experienced a stroke of genius. Rather, it started with a marriage, not one destined for happily ever after, but one that ignited creative magic. Cleese and his then-wife Connie Booth took an actual experience so comically catastrophic it lingered with them for years and made it into an unforgettable skit. It began during an infamous stay at the Gleneagles Hotel in Torquay, where Cleese encountered the hotel manager so ludicrously rude and inept that it could have been a satire. Most would have simply posted a bad review, but Cleese and Booth noticed something else. Comedy gold. The notion of a short-tempered hotel owner embroiled in anarchy would not go away, and before long, the seeds of Fawlty Towers were sown. But instead of simply creating a program about a grumpy innkeeper, the pair honed each second with wit, bewilderment, and characters so outlandish, they somehow did not feel unreal. When the show initially premiered on BBC in 1975, it didn't necessarily win over the critics. One labeled it a disaster, befuddled by its rapid-fire humor and absurd situations. But the public? They got it. Audiences immediately resonated with Basil Fawlty's frantic energy, Cleese's towering mass of nerves and rage, along with the quick-witted Sybil, the perpetually level-headed Polly, and hapless Manuel, who took every miscommunication and turned it into a combustible shambles. What made the show shine wasn't merely the slapstick disorder, but also the heightened timing and farcical tension in each episode. Every episode was a bomb of confusion, pride, and barely contained hysteria. Ironically enough, for such an iconic series, the BBC almost axed it after only 6 episodes. Reruns and increasing word of mouth, however, convinced executives otherwise. For years later, in 1979, a second and last series of episodes was produced. 12 had ever been produced, but those 12 entries cemented the show's status in TV annals. In the background, however, the tale was less optimistic. By the time they were filming the second series, Cleese and Booth had divorced. Despite that, they continued as partners in creative endeavors, refusing to leave things unfinished. It was the final time that they worked together, but their last performance was anything but acrimonious. They closed the curtain on Fawlty Towers in style together, their artistic chemistry intact even if their marriage wasn't. To this day, decades on, the show's comedy remains fresh. It's quoted, analyzed, and still viewed by new audiences who can't help but laugh at Basil's mounting rage or Manuel's bemused perplexity. Fawlty Towers demonstrated that anarchy, particularly the anarchy of two individuals attempting to make disaster become comedy, could be ageless. In some way, under that mix of embarrassing hotel staff, frazzled wires, and unadulterated farce, Cleese and Booth somehow provided the world with a sitcom that never checked out. The brilliance of Fawlty Towers. The lasting genius of Fawlty Towers. Even though only 12 episodes were ever produced, Fawlty Towers etched a legacy much bigger than its brief duration, and it is here that its sorcery never dwindles. When Fawlty Towers first aired in 1975, the reaction from TV critics was one of confusion rather than delight. Some condemned the series as disorganized and incomprehensible, failing to understand that the chaos was all part of the design. But while critics stood back, viewers locked in. They didn't only do it, their appetite for it couldn't be satiated. There was something nearly agonizingly familiar about seeing Basil Fawlty stumble through every day, certain he was calling the shots when the world just had other ideas. John Cleese's execution of Basil wasn't only humorous. It was a lesson in near-constant fury and misplaced drive. Basil was not evil or sadistic by nature. He was merely stuck in a fantasy of elegance he could never fully achieve.